Well, hello everyone and welcome to my webinar tonight, Wi-Fi, Mobiles and Radiation. So thanks for joining me. We're just waiting for a few more people coming on the line now, but if you have a look on the side column, you can actually ask some questions in the Q&A section or the chat section. So if you like, you can do that and I can try and answer those at the end of the webinar. Hopefully all your questions will be answered, but if not, you can certainly jump them on board and we can have a look at them later. All right, so we'll get started in just a moment, and any questions you can pop up now, but as I said, towards the end you can put them up as well as we go along. Okay, so let's just get started. Why this topic and why me? So I've been very interested in this topic for quite a while. My name is Karen McElroy, most of you know that, and I'm a naturopath and herbalist in Noosa. And I've been very passionately following this topic for some time, in fact, for probably about 8 to 10 years now. And these two little guys here are my kids, and that's one of the major reasons why I'm so passionate about this topic, because it's children's health that is by and far the major impact here on what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I've been following this and sharing my insights with my patients as I go along, but I thought it was time to actually put it all together, do the research and actually present it to you guys so that you can all start to be more informed and make some good decisions. Okay, so if we look at just historically, these kind of public health issues have been around for a while. So we've got the asbestos thing back in the 60s, where we now know asbestos is a highly carcinogenic compound causing lung cancer, mesothelioma. And then we had the skin cancer in the 70s, where we realised that actually overexposure to sun wasn't a good idea, and the sunbeds and things were a hazard. In the 80s, we had the Public Health Initiative to really look at cigarettes and finally decide that, yeah, they're no good and we don't need them and they're contributing to too many cancers. And now 20 or 30 years on, we've got the next major public health thing, which we'll put in the category of mobile phones and also Wi-Fi. So this nice little pictorial that comes from the Radiation Research Trust, I think is worth sharing, just to consider that we're along the line seeing lots of these different things historically. Okay, so the backdrop we have here is that although many diseases have remained steady over time, we've really seen a lot of increases in the last couple of decades. Things like obesity, diabetes, infertility, and a range of cancers have all risen, and some of these have risen really quite dramatically. But there's more as well. We've also had a surge in allergies, asthma, and behavioural and learning issues in kids. And we've also found, well, researchers basically find it very difficult to really point the finger at any particular factor, because obviously these are all multifactorial conditions and we're looking at a range of environmental issues that have changed over time. So in the last few decades, we've seen major changes in all sorts of things, from increased environmental chemicals. So you can look at this in terms of the chemicals in food particularly, but also in the environment. We've got the glyphosate or the Roundup, for example, and a lot of the plastics and chemicals, BPA. So there's a lot of times we can research and find links to these things. We've got changes in food quality, lifestyle habits as well, and obviously food consumption generally. We've got a nice picture there of whether we're going for the fast food or the healthy food that we traditionally had. But we've got this new kid on the block, and this new significant factor is this introduction of wireless technology and microwave frequency radiation, which comes from mobile phones as well. And this field really has literally exploded in the past 2 decades, and the figures that we'll be looking at tonight on this are fairly alarming. And the use is really growing at just an exponential rate. I was only down at Noosa on the river the other day and saw that we now have free Wi-Fi along the river. In public places now, there is increasingly free Wi-Fi hotspots. So we're literally being surrounded in it. Sorry, my phone just rang then. So this is something we really need to be aware of as we go along. So let's just have a little look at what's going on there with the cell phones and where the microwave radiation fits into this category. So this is all the different types of radiation that you can see. We've got the ionizing radiation, which we're all aware of. I mean, we're aware that X-rays and gamma rays and such things we've known for a long time are very harmful to human health. But we also know we've got UV light in here as well, and infrared radiation. But right down this other end here, we have the non-ionizing radiation, which is the very low frequency. Extremely low frequency as well comes from the electrical towers. So phones and modems and Wi-Fi modems fall into this category here, along with microwaves itself. So they're in the low frequency non-ionizing radiation. And because we've always thought that this end of the spectrum was the negative ones, we've tended to overlook the impacts on health with these other ones at the other end of the spectrum. But as we'll see tonight, there's a lot of problems going on. So what's the major concern? Well, as I'll allude to as well, we've got increasing numbers of researchers expressing their concern about the effects of these electromagnetic and microwave radiation on health. Now, the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, issued a declaration back in 2011 now, so we're looking 4 years ago, that this microwave radiation is a class 2B, which means possible carcinogen or cancer-causing agent. And this was after 30 experts came from over 14 countries came together to review the science. So it's pretty interesting. From that, quite a few of them really weren't happy that it was classified as only a possible carcinogen, because the research really showed that it was a known carcinogen and it should have been elevated to that. But the WHO took a very conservative estimate of this. They're still looking into it at the moment. So what they found from all this research was that there was an increase in the occurrence of various tumours amongst long-term and heavy users of cell phones or mobile phones. So we had brain tumours, a particular type of brain tumour, an acoustic neuroma, but also, and most of us are aware of that. I mean, I think everyone these days is aware of the fact that mobile phones and brain cancers kind of go together, and certainly some of the brain surgeons out there have been raising awareness on this issue. But less well known is some of these other cancers. So the parotid glands, which is in the mouth, and also the seminomas or testicular cancer. So that one is increasing, and it's certainly linked to mobile phone use. Also melanomas. Again, not many people would be thinking of using your mobile phone is going to cause a melanoma, but there is links to that, and lymphoma. So that's cancer, a type of cancer of the lymphatics and blood. So we've got an increase in tumour incidence across the board as well, where for people living nearby mobile transmitting stations, so the big mobile phone towers, there's definitely an increase amongst people living there with all sorts of cancers. Now, there's another category of effects here called Electro Hypersensitivity syndrome, or EHS as it's known. And this is a new disorder recognised medically and also by the WHO have come out and decided it is definitely a condition. And while a lot of us can report mild symptoms to exposure to like microwave radiation and EMR, you know, we might get headaches from sitting at a computer too long, or maybe from speaking on the phone. They might get a pain in the head or some heat, but it's a fairly obvious transient thing for a lot of people. But for a certain percentage of people are very severely affected by this sort of radiation. And it means that they have to cease work or change their entire lifestyle or move house completely. I did watch an interesting documentary on some people who just can't live basically in modern society because of this frequency. And it was in Europe, and the government was actually paying to protect this woman's house by painting it with a particular paint that shielded her house from the surrounding Wi-Fi radiation that was coming in, so she could actually live in the town, in her home, which is pretty amazing. So these sort of people are being classified as having this EHS. Obviously, it's really hard to quantify and diagnose, because some of the symptoms, as we'll see, are fairly wide. Skin symptoms such as redness, tingling and burning are experienced, fatigue, tiredness, concentration difficulties, dizziness, nausea and heart palpitations, and then we've got digestive and immune dysfunction. So they also resemble another category of modern kind of disease or syndrome rather, called multiple chemical hypersensitivity, and that's for people who can't cope with modern life and who just react to everything, all sorts of chemicals. So as I said, difficult to diagnose and treat because a lot of these symptoms can be all sorts of things, so it's not always pointed at. at that, and you might not always be looking at that. It's estimated to be about 10% of the population, so the figures are fairly broad and wide, and some estimate that's even higher. So it's something that I think will be on the increase, certainly as these technologies are just getting more and more common. So with this review that the WHO looked at, the scientific panel, this is just a bit of a quote here from the research paper, recognised that the body of evidence on this EMF requires a new approach to protection of public health, the growth and development of the fetus and of children, and it argues for strong preventative actions. New biologically based public exposure standards are urgently needed to protect public health worldwide. So it's a fairly strong statement there. And sadly, nothing much has happened on the ground after issuing that in the last 4 years. The WHO are actually conducting at the moment another study, a formal risk assessment, which is due to be released next year, about the actual health outcomes by these sort of radio frequency fields. So as I said, a lot of governments still got their head in the sand, unfortunately don't want to look at the statistics and don't want to really know about it. They're very slow to make the changes or review the safety recommendations. I did a little bit of a Google search on some of the government websites, and really there's just no mention of any of this stuff, and there's no changes in policy. And in fact, we're almost seeing the opposite happening. There's just more and more rolling out. So really, we need to be the ones as the public, I guess, getting ourselves educated and making some good changes and decisions about what we're going to do with our own lives. So Wi-Fi in schools, it's really now everywhere, and this is something I'm getting increasingly passionate about as well, and trying to raise awareness, because a lot of the research now into children is really concerning, and the fact that we're sending kids off to school every day and they're being surrounded by this is quite concerning. Children absorb as much as twice the microwave radiation as adults, and children's risk from exposure to a carcinogen and neurotoxin, which we can say this RFR is, increases as children's age decreases. So basically, the younger the child is, the increased exposure and risk factor is there. And really, this particular reference paper talked about educating by way of the internet via old-fashioned cables, which we always used until fairly recently, was no exposure. Basically, the cables insulate, this is Ethernet cables, insulate and protect the Wi-Fi signal, and they don't irradiate any humans in the process. And of course, we all know that's a little bit more reliable using the Ethernet as well, not just safer. So it's probably hard to find a school these days that doesn't have Wi-Fi in it to some extent. So I think it's something, it's going to take quite a big initiative, and unfortunately I think it's going to take a little while until people start to see more and more of this research coming out. But hopefully it's not going to be, you know, whose kids it's going to be, basically, who develops the next cancer or syndrome. Okay, so overseas, though, we have some other countries who are really doing good things, and France, I have to say, is leading the way. They have moved many schools back to cabled internet connections, and they've banned mobile advertising to children, because obviously selling phones to children is another whole market for phone companies, but we know that there's a major issue there. The French National Library actually has no Wi-Fi in France, so it's pretty amazing when I heard that. So they actually never really took it up. I think they were going to, and they decided that the risk assessment wasn't done and they would stick to the cabled connections. Other countries around the world are also stopping mobile phone sales to children, and some are even making moves to actually make certain areas, certain public spaces low emission in urban environments, because you can imagine in an urban environment that there's just so many of these data. I mean, when I open my computer, obviously at my clinic we have Ethernet cables, we don't have Wi-Fi, but if I have my Wi-Fi modem on, or sorry, my computer on picking up Wi-Fi, there's probably a dozen different Wi-Fi connections that I could try and hack into. So my computer is still surrounded basically by these things. So it makes it very difficult when you're in an urban environment to try and be clear of it, really. And obviously the closer you are to the modem outputs, the stronger the frequency is. A few other countries there as well, including Israel, Germany, Russia, Austria and Switzerland, a lot of the European countries there, making strong progress in banning and regulating Wi-Fi in schools and public places. I think Israel actually has a very progressive government on a lot of these sort of hot topics at the moment as well. So if we just go over and have a quick look at Queensland Health Safe Use of Technology Guide, this is straight off their website. We've got wireless devices, smart phones, smart mobile phones, tablets, slates, monitors, all emit low levels of electromagnetic radiation and should be used correctly. When using electronic devices, the department recommends you follow Wi-Fi 3G, 4G best practice, which is follow the manufacturer's usage guideline. I mean, most people don't even know what that is, I have to say. Operate from a table or a bench, not on your lap. So the whole idea of a laptop really should be changed to a bench top. So use hands-free devices to keep phones away from your head and body during phone calls. Limit the number and length of the calls that you make. Position the device antenna away from your body. Again, I don't think many people even know where their device antenna is. And I have to say that iPads are the worst. I think they have 2 or 3 antennas on them. So they basically very, very strong, way stronger than a mobile phone in terms of the emissions. And who plays with iPads the most, or these tablets the most? Kids, you know, and I certainly see a lot of kids and they just have them straight on their lap and they're playing on their games or doing whatever. One other thing here, do not sit within 0.5 metre of a wireless router. So a lot of people have their modem sitting on their desk and it's on wireless and they're being, you know, certainly way too close for what even the Queensland health guidelines, which I have to say are incredibly conservative. And lastly, using smartphones in areas of good reception to reduce exposure. So obviously when we're using them further away, the phone works harder. So if we move on and have a look now at the inside story. So a lot of the whistleblowers here have been the ones that have been bringing out the attention, particularly to the mobile phone companies in this context, because their accuracy of research has really been called into question, because a lot of the studies that were funded by phone companies didn't find the same findings, of course, that the independent studies were finding. And one particular researcher was essentially told his findings weren't accurate or weren't what they were looking for and didn't get any work and was trying to manipulate the science on this. So this is happening quite across the board, I think. And even initially, some of the warnings that were given were now being retracted by officials. So it's an area to really watch, because obviously the mobile phone companies, really, there's a lot of money being made. So let's just have a little look at how much money is being made. So it's multi-million dollars. So this is just Apple iPhone figures. Now, if we look here, this is just for one quarter. Obviously, it's the first quarter. So it's the 3 months of the year. Back in 2009, 4.4 million units of iPhones were sold globally. And now if we look, the slow or fairly exponential increase, when you really look at it, in 6 years, we've gone from 4.4 million units to 74.5 million units. And the average price of the iPhone is $687. So we've got an increase of 46% over the previous year. We can see some of these figures down there. The changes have gone up 100%, 86 to 128. They had a bit of a stall through here. And since they released the larger screen models to keep up to pace with what the consumer's wanting, they've had this increased growth again. So let's just have another little look at this big dollars at stake here with the phone companies. It's hard not to obviously be cynical about this, but 74.5 million iPhones were sold in the last quarter, which was 46%. 568 iPhones are sold every minute across the world. Apple said it sold 21.4 million iPads during December, and that was down by 18%, unfortunately. And do we really think that the phone tablet industry wants us to know about the real health effects of their devices? Do they want us to stop buying them? Do they want us to stop upgrading our phone every 12 months or whenever it is our contracts come up, and we need to get more and more the latest, the more powerful and the faster? So they're Wall Street Journal figures there. And now, unfortunately, from my perspective, we now have the Apple Watch, which is released this month. And that is basically wearable Wi-Fi. So we now, instead of even carrying it around in our pocket, we now attach it to our body and be able to do everything we want to do from these little phones and devices in a mini version as a watch. So this is even more concerning. I'm almost predicting, I suppose, that we're going to start to see increased tumours on the arm of people wearing these devices. And it's really sad because you kind of, I'm not a big fan of drug companies, and we already know from a lot of the research and the whistleblowing in that industry that there's a lot of behind the scenes doctoring of figures and statistics. But drug companies at least have the pretense of doing safety checks. And unfortunately with the Wi-Fi, we don't have that. So it doesn't seem to have to prove that its product is safe. It's just rolling it out, making millions and millions of dollars without actually having any research or proof of safety. So it's quite concerning when obviously drug companies do need to do trials and prove safety before being allowed to sell and market a drug to the public. In our case, we seemingly having to be, as the public, now that we've rolled all this out and everyone's addicted to this technology, it's up to us to somehow now prove that it's not safe, to prove that it's harmful instead of the other way around. So very concerning. Interestingly, insurance companies are sort of in on this story because they're the ones that are actually now very concerned, because obviously we have people starting to make claims. If you get cancer and you can prove that it was connected to your phone usage, well, you're going to want to start to blame someone, I guess. So one documentary that I watched revealed 60% of the major insurance companies across the world refusing to cover mobile phone companies against damage from public claims. So that's pretty significant. I mean, I think if the insurance companies are onto it, they know what's going on. Inside story. A couple of years ago, an Italian man won a landmark legal case ruling his phone usage was responsible for his brain cancer, which was pretty amazing. I think he was using it like 6 or 8 hours a day, heavy usage, basically claimed he didn't know it was harmful. The phone companies knew it was, and they didn't put enough warnings on there, and therefore they were responsible for not warning him about that. So these class actions are becoming more popular, and I think will be more so in the future. Also, insurance companies are now, their modelling shows that they're predicting big increases in brain cancer claims over the next 2 decades. So they're already doing their future modelling, expecting to have an increase in these things that we're seeing in the research. All right, so phone warning. So does your phone actually carry a warning? So this is only a new thing. New phones now do carry health warnings. So this is a little bit of a disclaimer for the phone companies trying to wipe their hands of the fact that their devices are harmful. But they're hidden away in the security and legal settings. They don't want you to know about it, but they kind of want you to have been able to find out about it. So it's in there, but it's hidden away. If you look through your iPhone or your latest phone, you'll find it's within the security and legal settings. There'll be some little disclaimer in there. You might want to have a play later on your phone and see what you can find. Older phones, I've got my Samsung is a few years old now, and it doesn't carry any warnings. I did check it, and there's nothing about safety. And even in the little manual, most of the safety things are to do with the battery of the phone, and it may be leaking toxic chemicals, but nothing to do with the radiation issues or of using the phone safely. All right, so if we look at how phones even work, so a lot of people really don't even understand what happens with the phones and why they'd be harmful in the first place. So mobile telecommunications use radio waves, which is the same radio frequency we were talking about earlier. And this is to use to receive calls, to make texts, to send emails, pictures, get on the web, etc. So the signal is sent from the handset to the nearest base station or phone tower, which then sends the signal to a digital telephone exchange and onto the main telephone network. So this connects the signal to the receiving phone via a base station if it's to another mobile phone handset. And the mobile network automatically adjusts the power required to maintain a connection between basically the mobile phone and the base station. So you'll know that, your phones do. Certainly I live in an area where there's actually not particularly good reception, and I have to go outside and try and find a reception. And you do feel that the phone kind of does seem to heat up and get hotter when it's struggling to get that connection. So you might have heard of SAR. This is something I've kind of been onto for a while, and certainly when I bought a new phone, it was something I researched to really try and get the lowest SAR reading of a phone. So this is a specific absorption rate. So it's the amount of radio frequency radiation energy absorbed by the body when using a mobile phone. So the Australian and WHO recommendations basically at the moment state that it can't exceed 2.0 watts per kilogram. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's just a kind of a figure. Other countries have stated it maximums at 1.6 watts per kilogram. some countries, I think America uses a completely different kind of category of SAR, but I'll just show you basically how they determine this. So this is a little bit of a laboratory test system. So we've got the human box or phantom. Basically, they put a phone here and activate the phone, and then this little robot essentially scans for the radio signal and the electromagnetic radiation, and finds where it's got the where the highest amount being emitted is, and then it converts that into a SAR. And these levels are recorded for all different devices, so you can actually find out what your SAR is. I have to say that iPhones have some of the highest SARs, and of course they're some of the most popular phones. And I think some of the other modern smartphones have very high SAR ratings. So you basically don't want to be using them up against your body at all. So the SAR is the sort of original things, and this is where we were talking about with this heating effect of using a phone. And that was originally, I guess, where most people were concerned, that was what was going on. But we now know that there's actually a lot of non-thermal effects, so they're non-heating effects, if you like, that are more biologically active, so not heating but doing other things, documented from the phones. So they've found it actually as low as 0.1 microwatts per centimetre squared. This is all fairly technical, but if you just bear with me. But they basically were showing that even at very, very, very low levels of SAR, which weren't able to be detecting in that microwave heating capacity, was still demonstrated to be very effective in inducing significant stress into the living cells. But this hasn't been translated at all. We're still basically running on exposure limits that are way, way higher than that. So you can look at the difference there. We've got a 0.1 microwatts, and here the international limits are looking at 450 to 1,000 microwatts. So if we've got cellular change happening right down here at these tiny, tiny absorbed energy frequencies, and yet we're saying it's safe to have them up to this range, there's a huge disconnect here with what's really happening. So let's move on and have a little look now at the sources of electromagnetic microwave radiation. So this really, it is widespread and varied, and most homes or businesses have multiple sources, so not just the one. So the common sources, obviously the most obvious, mobile phones and tablets or iPads, those kind of devices. And now these are when they're switched on, even when they're not being used. So remember, your phone is emitting continually, detecting, looking for signals to pick up from the base station, essentially. And the same if you're on 3G, 4G with your iPads and things like that. When they're on and they're on Wi-Fi, they're continually searching for that. So they are emitting. Portable cordless phones as well, unfortunately, they're no good, most of them. You can get some that don't emit, but again, they are seeking their base station the whole time. So if you've got your cordless phone hanging around miles from its base station, they're communicating with each other and emitting this kind of radiation. Obviously, again, wireless modems and routers. Television screens and computer monitors as well also emit low frequency radiation. Microwaves, but only when they're being used. So when a microwave is not being used in a kitchen, it doesn't actually emit anything, but certainly while it is being used, it does. Now, all the wireless devices that we have, this is the printers, mouse, keyboards, all of those Bluetooth and wireless devices are continually seeking out, the mate that they're paired to, and they will also be continually emitting this low frequency radiation. Smart meters, these are becoming more common now. Certainly some people have their whole house wired up with these smart meters. They can control their house from a distance, and certainly some of the bigger in the cities now, they've got a lot of companies like water companies and electrical supply companies with smart meters installed, which is very concerning. It makes it easier job for them because it doesn't have someone coming out to your home to read the meter. But obviously we've now got another device that's irradiating. Baby monitors, unfortunately, really not a good idea, especially as we find out that children are by far at highest risk of this. Game consoles as well, and obviously the big source as well if you're living near a mobile phone tower. So a lot of things there, and you're probably going to count a few of those in your own home, and something to be very aware of. So if we look now at some of the symptoms and signs and disorders that are linked to this radio frequency microwave radiation, so they're very varied, and some of these touch on some of those electro sensitivity syndrome I looked at earlier. But we've got very specific ones as well. These are all being proven in different aspects of research that I've covered here. Some of the obvious or difficult ones: blurry vision, dizziness, headaches, etc., nausea. So some people experience that. You may not even realise that, of course, it's from sitting near your modem that you're starting to get these side effects. Autism and ADHD, we'll cover that just in a moment. It's a very important one. It was one of the first research papers that I looked at, actually, that did link this kind of radiation to a condition. It was out quite a while ago now, but it did always make an impression on me. Sperm count and quality and fertility. So I do a lot of work with fertility, and certainly we're seeing quite a lot of research coming out now about that. Range of cancers, leukemia, etc. And there's also a increased risk for Alzheimer's, heart conditions, etc. And across the board, immune dysfunction, things like autoimmunity and allergies, which of course have multifactorials as well. Again, I'm not sort of suggesting that all these conditions are only caused by this, but this particular type of radiation can be a synergistic aspect of this, can be a promoter for these conditions to be expressed. So we just look at the autism thing now. As I said, it was one of the first things that I looked at quite a few years ago that made me very suspicious of the wireless technology. And this is the the rate of autism that we've got here back in the 70s, very, very low. And interestingly, this exposure to microwave radio frequency exposure, which is becoming increasingly more common, particularly since the last kind of 10 to 20 years, has basically mirrored at a perfect level the rise in autism spectrum disorders. So there's been a few modelling, I have to say, with this rise, because there's been a lot of things that have changed in the last 20 years. And again, Roundup use of glyphosate in agriculture has also followed a very similar timeline to autism. So another researcher basically put together a similar graph. But all it does is tell us that we've got major environmental changes that are happening in the last 20 or so years, which are essentially mirroring that increased risk of autism. So how does actually this microwave radiation affect autism? So this woman called, I think, Maria was brought out the paper that basically found this. She was finding that a lot of children were unable to detox the heavy metals. She was putting them on a fairly standard detox protocol to help eliminate mercury out of their brain, which was something she was working with to improve their autism. And she found that basically this exposure to this frequency was stopping these kids from doing that. And then when she removed them from that environment, they started to clear heavy metals again through the urine. So it was a certain subclass of children who were just unable to do that. And we'll find out in a moment exactly why that happens, because of the cell basically scrambling, the cell signalling. So it again was found to be a synergen and acting in conjunction with a range of environmental and genetic factors. So in of itself, it may not do anything, but when you've got that perfect storm of other things going on, and that's where autism then has a much higher risk for happening. All right, so if we look at fertility as well, just in a little bit more detail, mobile phone stored in a man's pocket, there's been about 2 or 3 studies now that have come out to show that it definitely has an impact on sperm count. And use of laptop computers as well that were connected to Wi-Fi was showed to decrease male fertility as well. So it decreased sperm motility, increased DNA fragmentation, which of course leads to possible birth defects or teratogenic effects there. And another study also found links with erectile dysfunction, so that the more exposure a man had using mobile phones and Wi-Fi also gave him an increased risk of erectile dysfunction. So quite interesting there. All right, and now breast cancer and mobile phones. This is a sort of fairly hot topic at the moment, because we've had an interesting study found 4 young women who were using, basically back in 2013, had breast cancer. Now, they were directly related to their use of their phones and storing, in fact, their phones in their bra for up to 10 hours a day. So they would go off to work or uni or whatever they were doing, pop their phone in their bra, down in their cleavage, and that would be where they carry their phone all day. easy access, I guess, and also if they didn't have a bag or pockets, they could just pop it in there. Now, they did this for several years. It was a range of women, and they all developed tumours in the areas of their breast that were immediately underlying where their phones were placed. Very kind of spooky stuff. It was interesting that one of the surgeons that was interviewed said you just don't see the particular tumour that they had, or that particular region of the breast was never really seen. Breast cancer didn't occur in that part of the breast very typically at all, and it was basically directly underneath that. And all these women didn't have any family history of breast cancer. They tested negative for the genetic tests, or sorry, the genes rather, BRCA1 and 2, and they had no other known breast cancer risk. So it was directly related to that. So basically this is what they're doing. Now, when I was putting this together, I found quite scarily this new little bra that's being brought out that has a side pocket called the Joey bra, where you can pop your phone in to the side, which is very scary. So you, again, store your phone there all day. The other women had been storing it much more like this one here. And also we've got another gym. People can go to the gym, work out, and have their phone on their chest. This one, of course, sitting right above the heart there, which you wouldn't want to do. Also, there's even underwear now that have pockets in there for your phone. So really, I don't know what to say to this other than it's quite ridiculous and very concerning that people are actually designing clothes for us to be able to wear our phones much more closely in very sensitive parts of the body, I have to say, that are prone to being disrupted very easily. Now we move over to have a look at kids, and as I said a few times already this evening, kids are at even greater risk than adults. Now the reason that they are is that they're smaller size generally, they're more absorbent brains, and their thinner skulls give them a much higher risk of these negative impacts. Research has shown that children absorb between 1.5 to 3 times more than adults of this radio frequency and microwave radiation. So they're not little adults, you know, they are physiologically and neurologically immature, and without their systems being fully formed, they're much more at risk and prone to being damaged in that developmental fragile time. So we know that the microwave radiation alters the blood-brain barrier, so toxins can leak into the brain, so it changes the way the cells work. And this can obviously go on to cause all sorts of neurological and psychological problems much more easily. So this is a good picture just to show essentially what's happening here. So we've got a 5-year-old. This is where, if they're using a phone, this is how far it penetrates into the skull, which is, in a 5-year-old, it's almost coming out the other side. A 10-year-old going approximately 2/3 of the way into the brain, and for an adult we've got about 1/3 of the way into the brain. So every time a little kid pops the phone up to their ear, essentially they're radiating their whole brain with this, and you can see here the absorption rate is essentially double to what the adult is. That's very concerning. Another study carried out on children using a mobile phone found that after even just 2 minutes use of the phone, the children had their natural brain waves disrupted for up to 2 hours afterwards. That was pretty alarming stuff for me. And this was called long-term potentiation, and it was suggested that it could last up to even 6 weeks in terms of how their brain waves were affected. Another one found low-level radiation received from, for example, school Wi-Fi sources was shown to be 1 million times higher than just the natural background radiation at the same frequencies that would occur away from these devices. So we're talking serious stuff here for kids who are exposed to Wi-Fi and or mobile phones on a regular basis. And this sort of scene that we're looking at here, I have to say, is kind of getting really common. Certainly a lot of people that I see that come into the clinic, or you see on, you know, out in the public, at restaurants and things. These days, it's like everywhere you go, kids have got devices and they just using them freely as if they're toys, and they are not toys. We can't have a car trip anymore without being entertained by DVDs and games. And here, even at the beach, we can't get away from Wi-Fi devices. There's little tanks here that you can zoom around on the beach and spy on people. So it's just, yeah, there's so many toys out there, it's very concerning. So the research is really growing. I mean, originally we were sort of finding it hard to see where the conclusions were being drawn, because a lot of cancers obviously take years to develop, and the ones that were connected to the mobile phones, particularly the brain cancers, originally the research was showing that they take at least 10 years to develop, and so there's so many other variables in that 10-year period, and it's very hard to join the dots up to have a causative impact. But it really does appear to be a massive public health experiment with us as the guinea pigs, I have to say, because it's happened without anyone's consent, and we're basically on one big research trial. So I think watch this space is what I'll be saying to that, because the research is continuing. Something that came out actually only a month or two ago showed that teenagers using mobile phones before the age of 20 were 5 times more likely to develop cancer by their late 20s. So if we look at that, modern, this is obviously research from probably these kids that were now in their late 20s, and what we're seeing now, the widespread use amongst teenagers pretty much constantly on their mobile phones or on their Wi-Fi devices. And so it's very concerning that if they're 5 times more likely to develop it by their late 20s, I think we're going to be having a little bit of an epidemic in the next couple of decades. So as I said, it hasn't really got anything to do with the heating effects. Now, the thermal effects are what all the basically the safety data is collated from traditionally and what was recommended. But we now know that the biological effects are established at very low frequency exposures that are way, way less than the thermal effects of this microwave heating kind of action on the body. So study after study, the same results. So in one review paper, they looked at 80 papers, and 76 out of the 80 studies that were looked at confirmed that mechanisms of inflicting cellular damage happened at below thermal levels. So it's a little bit technical here. So again, hang in there if you're not so wired that way to think about this science, but we'll try and understand a little bit more what's going on at the cell level. So these low frequency radiations basically could lead to mutagenic effects through expressive oxidative damage of DNA, because the substantial overproduction of ROS, which is short for reactive oxygen species, which is just basically like free radicals, under low intensity frequency exposure could cause a broad spectrum of health disorders and diseases, including cancer in human beings. That was a summary of that. So how it affects our cells. So basically it affects the whole body because it conducts electricity a little bit like an antenna. So we absorb the radiation, and as you probably all know, we have the way our body works is through electrical signaling and cell communication. So there's sort of like, and we're very much full of water, and water is part of that extra rippling effect that can occur when we absorb something. There's a flow-on effect. So these eddy currents get generated beyond the site of application. So you can have a phone up to your head or having something anywhere on your body, and you're going to basically absorb it into that tissue. But it doesn't just stop there. It does have this flow-on effect with cell membranes being weakened, and it basically affects the way the cell communicates with other cells, and obviously how the cell behaves in of itself as well. So the membranes become very weak and they can leak, and that can cause a lot of issues. So cancer initiation and cancer promotion was another thing that all the studies found. And also the damage occurred decreased the activity of our major liver detoxifier, which is SOD, or superoxide dismutase, and also our major antioxidant compound glutathione. They were both shown to be decreased after being exposed to radiofrequency radiation. So one of our major components in the body that keeps us healthy and prevents cancer, etc., is being damaged through this exposure. So even though it doesn't directly induce DNA damage, so we know compared to the ionizing radiation, like the gamma rays and X-rays, that does directly induce DNA damage. We know that the EMF doesn't do that, yet it doesn't mean that it can't indirectly do that. So what we find is once these cells start to be affected and their gene expression and signaling is affected, then that can go on to have a change which leads to DNA damage. So it's kind of like an indirect effect we've got many effects along the way in terms of the way the cell proliferates, cell cycle regulation, metabolism, etc. These are all the ways that the cell functions. And if that's damaged and the cell doesn't work correctly, then we can get DNA strand breaks, which obviously affect then. That's why we have cancer initiation and cancer promotion from these kinds of technology. This little picture basically just shows you here, for example, how cells communicate when you get leakage across membranes, or here things are getting absorbed. So this is the area or the component that the EMF basically targets in the body. The substantial production here of ROS, or reactive oxygen species, in living cells basically causes broad spectrum health disorders, including cancer. So this is just a little bit of it inside the cell, what we've got different types of things and what happens when we get these environmental stresses, whether they're coming from ultraviolet light, the sun, and also obviously all the mobile phone, EMF, and a range of other things obviously as well, all the chemicals, all the things that we already know about. All right, so let's move on now, after all that sobering information, to look at what we can actually do. So do we have to go and live in this beautiful little shack on the beach somewhere away from everyone and everything? Or is there something else we can do as well? We can't all go and run to the hills and live in a bubble. And I'd have to say that increasingly, even escaping into nature in fairly, regional places, we're still getting surrounded by these signals because of this increased public Wi-Fi kind of component. So if we look firstly at just ways we can reduce exposure from phones, obviously not using a phone for a call and sticking it up on your head is a really important one. So sending text messages instead is a very useful thing to do. Turning your phone off at night especially, or at least in flight mode, if you need to have it on for an alarm or something like that, have it on flight mode. So overnight your body's getting that break from that constant exposure, I think is a very sensible idea. And again, you're not needing to use it at night. You don't need to have your phone on. Some people I know, that we're all become so addicted to this communication that a lot of people with sleep disorders are not able to sleep because they're constantly getting up and checking on their Facebook page or whatever in the middle of the night. So I think turning it off gives you a welcome relief from that as well, I'd have to say. If you are on a phone call itself, use speakerphone. You can also get safe headsets. Now, some of the headsets do actually tend to consolidate or increase the radiation and just send it straight back up through the tube, but there is air tube type ones that you can get that don't do that, so that they insulate the radiation and take it away from the body rather than going straight into your ear, just as it would if you're on the phone. So there's something you can look into. Use Bluetooth in your car. Now, Bluetooth obviously on its own still has a bit of an issue because it's the communication is the devices are still communicating with each other. However, if you're taking a call, it's obviously a lot safer to use Bluetooth because the frequency is a lot lower than it would be. It's kind of if it's up against your ear or very close to you. Don't carry your phone on your body. So certainly all the guys out there who've come to see me with sperm issues, we talk about this frequently. And so a lot of the time men particularly store it on their body more than women. Most of us carry bags and we'll throw our phone in our bag, so we're not as prone to that. Though we did see earlier the women with the breast cancer certainly were wearing it on their body. But men often will either have it in two places. I find they've even got it in their jean pocket, which is obviously exposing their genitals to the radiation, or they have it in their shirt pocket, and that could mean their heart and organs around the chest area are now being exposed at a higher level as well. So either of those options are really not great. So I think we need to basically get the man bag happening, or put phones just on your desk away from right where you are, not on wearing it around with you. Try not to store it in your bedroom, as I said, having it off at night. But if you're going to sleep, you really don't want sleep to be disturbed by these devices. We've got enough circulating around. We already know, obviously, that electrical wiring and things like that, there's another whole discussion we could have about that itself, because if you have electrical, boxes and things near your bed, a lot of people have sleep issues from that, and our body's constantly surrounded by these other extremely low frequency ones. But these ones that we can control a bit more easily, like switching our phone off or putting it on flight mode, or changing things like that. Those simple behaviours can make a big difference. So use an EMF blocking device. Now, there's a lot of different ones on the market. I'm not going to be endorsing any particular one, primarily because I haven't actually done enough of the research. I have tried to look into this quite a few times over the years, and it is a bit of a minefield, and I'm concerned that some of the devices aren't as good as they're cracked up to be. I think there is, on my website at the end of the call, you can have a look. I have got a couple of ones you can go have a look at, but I'm personally not endorsing them. I'm not 100% sure, though one of them has had a reasonably good trial done on it for a mobile phone, at least, for lowering the emissions by, I think, 50% or so while you're using your phone. But if you want to do that, I'd say do the research, and you can actually find out a little bit more about what you can do to lower those through those sorts of devices. But just be careful, because I do think there are some people making money out of fairly, dodgy devices as well. And lastly, I want to say, don't let kids use phones. Like, seriously, it's one of the most important things to tell from those pictures that I showed earlier, where the radiation basically going right through their skull, nearly out the other side, is very concerning. So if kids have to use a mobile phone, definitely have a strict rule about speakerphone, or get the kids to just SMS and text message, because it's just much safer. You're not getting that thing right up against their head. And that study that showed that even 2 minutes of a mobile phone call had lasting effects for many hours was very concerning to me. So now Wi-Fi, which is obviously the big one, because obviously phone, we kind of have a bit of an awareness about phones, I think, to some extent. But the Wi-Fi we're becoming very complacent with, and I think this is an area that we can make some big changes with, despite the fact that it's kind of everywhere now, and it's going to take quite a big public health initiative to turn back this clock, because it's become a bit of a right. Everyone seems to want to be able to have this communication anywhere, anytime, and they get very upset if they can't get on, Google and find the answer to something in the middle of dinner or something like that. I think we have to just really look at what we've created for ourselves here and be sensible about it, and just pull back on that until the research can be done where we can prove safety. And then, no one will have a problem with rolling something out if it's proven safe. But we've had the opposite scenario happening, where it's rolled out and hasn't been proven safe first, and now we have to sort of scramble around trying to prove that it's harmful, which is a fairly hard place to operate from. So with Wi-Fi, I really do recommend turning it off at night, or when you're not using your computer. So if you're not on your computer all day and you're in the family home particularly, just have it off. You don't need to have Wi-Fi transmitting the whole time. So you can flick a switch on or off fairly easily. And storing the Wi-Fi modem in a way very, further away as you can from any living areas is a good idea as well. But particularly at night, so that the body can get that lovely break where it is trying to heal and restore overnight. You're not exposed to continual frequencies that are affecting the cell function at a low level. Use Ethernet cables. That's what I use, and I've always got this funny story about when I moved from Melbourne 8 years ago now into our house, and we had to set up the offices in the home, and obviously getting the internet connected. And I refused to have Wi-Fi back then because of my concern. And that meant the electrician had to come in and hardwire the Ethernet cables. Of course, our offices were at either end of the house, which was great distress to everyone. But we did it, and we now have only ever used Ethernet. So it just means you have your computer in one spot and you stick a cable in. It's not a big deal. And certainly we did the same at the office as well, in the clinic, because of the concerns. If we can try and make these changes, it's not a big deal. I mean, we were using Ethernet cables before, and suddenly now we have Wi-Fi, and it means you can just have to sit down and on one particular space. You can get long cables if you want and be able to move it around, but for the sake of a little bit of cable, I think it's a good idea. Avoid portable phones as well, or get one that doesn't emit frequencies when not in use. So the portable phones at home, there is a small percentage on the market that you can get that don't actually communicate with their base station unless they're being used. But a lot of the ones do just keep emitting devices, and they've been shown to be quite harmful as well. Avoid all Wi-Fi toys for kids. And as I said earlier, tablets, these types of things which are full of games for kids are used like they're toys, but they're not toys. They're powerfully electronic devices that are emitting harmful radiation for kids. So just be really aware of that and stick to toys that are actual toys that don't carry with them warnings and safety warnings. And lastly, choose wired options wherever possible. So this is including like your modem, also your printer. You know, having a printer cable is not a bad thing, and devices like mouse, using a mouse as well. It's not a big deal to have a little bit of cable. You know, we've become so hoodwinked into this Wi-Fi thing that we don't realise anymore what we're doing. So I just wanted to mention a little bit, because as a naturopath, obviously I'm interested in ways of actually supporting health, not just through those kind of mechanisms, but also through what we can do with our diet and herbal medicine that can help. So some of the studies have found that antioxidants can reverse some of this oxidative stress that's caused by the radio frequency radiation. So we can basically get stuck into some of these things as much as we can with the whole foods, but also with supplements if necessary. So these include vitamin E and acetylcysteine, which is otherwise known as NAC. Some of you will know that one. Vitamin C, selenium, L-carnitine, turmeric and garlic. So this is some of the research that shows specifically these antioxidants can reduce the stress by this particular frequency. And there's lots of herbs that can help the body detox generally, which protects it from the damaging effects of radiation exposure. Organic foods can help. So you don't, just on this note too, before we finish here, I haven't put on the website, there's a little downloadable sheet that's basically summarising these tips, so you don't need to madly take notes here if you like. But we can look at organic food. Obviously, organic food, you want to get the most clean, healthy, vital food that you can. You don't want food coming in when you're trying to use it, particularly to help boost health, where it's already full of herbicides and pesticides. So try as much as you can to get organic food, particularly for some of these ingredients here that we're talking about. So fresh veggies and fruits that are rich in antioxidants and phytonutrients that are very good for health include garlic, onion, ginger and turmeric, apple, beetroot, celery, parsley, kale, leafy greens, the citrus like lemon and limes, and avocado. So the green smoothie type numbers in the morning where you can throw a heap of things together is a good idea, preferably to do that more than the juices, because you'll get more of the good stuff in all the fibre as well. And then baths with lemon, Epsom salts or bentonite clay. Sphagnum, which is peat moss as well, has a very good detoxifying effect and protects the body as well. It has a very strong effect on that, the vital force or the etheric of the body as well. So it also can help the body to detox. So they're just some of the things you can do, but obviously trying to limit your exposure in the first place is the best possible place to start. And I just want to reiterate here that there's absolutely no safe level of this for pregnant women, babies and kids. So the researchers, and when they summarised all this, basically said there's just no level that is safe for an embryo, a fetus, a child or a pregnant woman. So be really clear on that. So women using mobile phones as well when they're pregnant, they are putting their little babes at risk because they're in a very developmentally fragile time, and we want to keep their environment as healthy and clean as possible. And if you think of children with these transmitters near their body, the question must be, why do this for the sake of a piece of cable and a plug, which could replace Wi-Fi with no less of performance and in fact improved performance, and yet we're getting all the safety benefits of that as well. Okay, so what next? You can visit my website to see, like I said, I've got a little article in there and some links, and all the research links to this webinar are listed on there as well. You can click on a little download a sheet. I've also got a little sheet of those tips around what you can do to limit your exposure, etc. So that's on karenmcelroy.com.au/Wi-Fi. Campaign your school to remove Wi-Fi. I'll also have a link on my webpage there for Wi-Fi in Schools Australia, which is an organisation who is advocating to remove Wi-Fi from schools until further testing can be done. So I'd urge you to get involved with that, because it is seriously something I think we need to do, particularly to protect the children as much as possible. Stay in touch with me. I've got a Facebook page there if you haven't already found it, and you can also sign up on my website. I've got a little newsletter, monthly newsletter, that you can receive articles, research, tips, recipes, etc. So if you have any questions, you feel free to write them on the sidebar there, and I can, if you want to hang on the line for a little longer, you can do that. But thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you feel inspired and empowered to make some changes in your life and be more aware of this. So thank you. Just going to check if there's any questions. And it doesn't look like, so that's great. I'm going to sign off now. Obviously, if you do have any questions, you can shoot me an email as well afterwards, and we'll see you later. Thank you very much.